Clunky loose steering. More often than not, it's due to a failing tie rod. That's something that you can do yourself easily and quickly. The problem is, when you replace that tie rod, you throw off your alignment, which means you've got to go pay someone to align your car. We don't want to pay someone to do an alignment. So, in today's video, I'm going to show you how to replace your tie rods, inner and outer, without the need for having an alignment afterwards. And no, it's not just counting the turns. Now, every car actually has an outer tie rod end and an inner tie rod end on each side. This is what actually comes from your steering box or your rack and pinion and pushes the wheel so that your car steers. So when your tie rods wear out, it's not holding your wheel stable, and so your tires wear out faster, and if it gets really bad, this could actually break off, allowing your wheel to completely go sideways, and if you were on the road, that would be incredibly dangerous. Now when you get your car aligned, they use this threaded section where the outer tie rod attaches to the inner as a way to fine-tune your car's toe alignment. But in order to replace this, you actually have to unscrew it completely and you lose that adjustment. That's why normally you have to get an alignment done afterwards. So if you suspect you have a bad tie rod, this is how you make sure. So you're gonna grab the wheel side to side, try to wiggle it left and right. And if the tie rod is bad, especially that inner tie rod, you're gonna get play in the wheel and you're gonna hear it clunking. Next thing is, you wanna get the wheel off and you come down and look at the outer tie rod and it has a little rubber booty. If that is split and grease is coming out, there's a good chance that it means dirt and crap got inside there and ruined that joint. So you wanna inspect the rubber boot. And also you wanna grab the outer tie rod and try to twist it like this. If it moves really easily, it's failing. The other thing you can do when the wheel is off is you can do that same motion, trying to move it left and right while holding the outer tie rod and while holding the inner tie rod. You'll feel that clunking stronger when you're holding one or the other, and you can kind of figure out which one is bad. That being said, if you're feeling a clunking on one of your tie rods, you might as well just do them both because the parts aren't that expensive. And you're in there doing it anyway. Before we take anything apart, we need to mark our alignment so that when we put everything back, it's the same. What a lot of YouTube videos will tell you to do is just count the number of turns when you're removing the outer tie rod and do the same number of turns when you put the new one back on, but that's not totally accurate, especially if you get an aftermarket part that doesn't have the same number of threads. So I'm gonna show you how to do it exactly. So what you're gonna need is some kind of a stick, something straight and rigid that you're going to essentially temporarily attach to your hub. I'm gonna put 2 lug nuts back on and kind of lock it in. We don't want this thing moving at all. Snap it off here. So you want it nice and close to the ground because you're gonna put a piece of tape on the pavement here. Now we're just gonna go to the other side and set it up exactly the same. And while we're doing this, I just wanna take a second to thank all of you that have subscribed to the channel. We really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed, consider doing it. Really helps us out. So now that I have sticks installed on both sides, I'm gonna come down here and I'm gonna mark right where the stick point is above the ground. And I'm gonna do it on this side as well. Now the reason that we're doing this, and the reason we're doing it on both sides, is because we're trying to maintain that toe angle. So it's the relative angle of one wheel to another. So even if I move this, it moves the other side, something gets bumped, we can always come back to those 2 points and know it's exactly where it was before. And lastly, as you're working on your tie rods, you just gotta be careful that you don't break the stick, move it, bump it. You wanna make sure that it stays exactly the same so that you can get that precise measurement at the end. So we're gonna pull this nut off, but it is blocked obviously by this pin. So we're gonna straighten out this little pin, wrench on the nut. Some tie rods are oriented on the top on some cars, so you'd then obviously hammer from the bottom. You can see how this just flopped right down and it's not able to hold itself up. That's a sign of a wearing inner tie rod. The new ones are really stiff. So now we've got to remove this boot, and it's got a little clamp on the front end, which you can get with needle nose. And then the one in the back is a little more tricky. So the bands that hold this on from the factory are usually metal and they have a crimp point. You put a screwdriver on it and then you just whack it with a hammer. There we go. So now we're gonna remove this outer tie rod. So I'm gonna put 1 wrench on the flat spot of the tie rod. Then the other wrench goes on the locking nut. And what I'm trying to do is get them oriented so that when I squeeze the 2 handles together, it pops them loose. It's tightening, so I need to reverse. So now when I squeeze these together, it's lefty-loosey on the tie rod end. Wow, that's really tight. If it's really tough, like this one is being right now, I'm actually gonna go ahead and slip this back into its hole on the hub really quick. That way that'll kind of hold it. I can even throw this nut back on a couple threads. So now that that's loose, you can see the tie rod end is loosey-goosey. And this would be the point where you would remove it and count the turns, right? So they would say count this as 1 turn. But with our method, we don't really need to do this. Then we're gonna take this lock nut off. There's also a flat spot for a wrench on the inner tie rod so you can hold it. Now we can just grab the whole boot and pull it straight out. Now to remove an inner tie rod, you will need a special tool, but just like a lot of tools, you can get this one for free at a big auto shop that does a tool rental program. This is an inner tie rod remover. Basically, it has all the different fittings for the different sizes and the actual tool that you'll use to crank that thing out. So just to show you how this tool works, because it's a little hard to see in there, I have the new inner tie rod, and you can see there's flat spots. So once you find the one that fits, you're gonna set it onto the tie rod sitting in the car, and this tube is gonna grab the little ears, and it will then allow us to spin it out of the rack and pinion. So I'm gonna install my little tool piece here. I'm gonna hold it in place while I install the tube. Put my 1/2-inch drive wrench on the end, and I can start loosening, lefty-loosey. Now this will just spin right off. So here's the old one, and if I grab the end of it, this ball joint is really loose, whereas the new one is very stiff. I can't even move it by hand. Same is true for the old outer tie rod. I can move this very easily, but this one, I can't. It's super stiff. Just as a side note, some inner tie rods will come with an optional washer. Some cars need them, some don't, and this one doesn't. One last thing before I put it in, I'm gonna put a little blue Loctite on these threads. Really don't want that thing coming off, that would be dangerous. Nice and tight. If the boot you took off is split, obviously you want to get a new one, but this one's in good shape, so I'm going to reuse it. However, the band that I broke off is ruined, so we are going to use a zip tie. And it's plenty strong enough. This isn't rotating. It just has to hold there and go like this. One thing I like to do is partially start the zip tie before I install, so I don't have to mess with it deep inside. Now I can slip this boot back to its outer groove and reinstall the clip. Now I'm going to put the locking bolt onto the inner tie rod, screw it all the way to the end. Now I'm going to screw on the outer tie rod. So I'm doing it roughly the turns that I took it out. I'm going to reinstall it into the hub here and see how close I am to my marks. It's a lot harder when this stuff is new because these are really stiff. Okay, I'm gonna put the new nut on, just a couple turns so that it doesn't fall out. As we get ready to readjust the alignment on that left side that we're working on, first we wanna come over to the right side and make sure that this hasn't moved. If it has, you just wanna either turn the steering wheel with a partner, or you can actually sometimes just adjust it here. You wanna get it right back above that line. And back on this left side, before we've even made any adjustments, luckily we're pretty close. Now, if you were way off the mark, you would want to probably pop this tie rod end out, do a couple more turns in or out until you got closer to the mark. But once you get close, you can tighten this bolt and then you can do the fine tuning with the inner tie rod. Just make sure any wrenching that you're doing, you're always double checking that far side mark, make sure that's dead on before you finalize this mark. So now that this is nice and tight, I'm gonna go ahead and put a wrench on my inner tie rod, which is free to spin, and I'm gonna spin it and that will slowly adjust my toe. And then when I get it in the right spot, I'm gonna lock it off. Before I lock everything down, I wanna come and triple check this right side, make sure nothing's moved, and then I know I'm good to go. Once everything is lined up, all my marks are good, I can come in and tighten this lock nut. So what I wanna do here is I'm gonna put the wrench on this lock nut, but then I also wanna put a wrench on the tie rod, because if I just start cranking on this, it's gonna put a lot of pressure on the joint itself, which I don't want. Ugh. You gotta make a lot of guttural noises. It makes things tighter. So there you go. New inner and outer tie rod has been installed and the alignment has not changed from where it was before. Now all we need to do is put the wheel back on and we're good to go. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you're definitely gonna wanna check out our recent one on the top 5 DIY fixes that mechanics love to overcharge you for.